Hello. Do I have a great show for you? I have an interview with Sean McBride, a West Point graduate, a C++ guru, currently employed over at CrowdStrike. But first, I think we need to talk about the elephant, or should I say, Big Apple in the room, baby. Well, Judge Yvonne, not taking any flack from the boys in Cupertino. Apple has been found in civil contempt for violating the court's ruling regarding allowing outside purchases for app developers. The whole what is a button, what is a link thing, where Apple tried to do some pretty fancy footwork to reinterpret the judge's order to basically nullify it. The original order was from, I think, like 2 years ago. And yeah, no, as of this recording, Apple in the US at least has to allow outside in-app purchases. Basically, what that means is you, as a developer, can avoid paying the 30%. Stripe already has an offering for this rolling right out. Developers can just implement. To say that Epic's Tim Sweeney is happy is a wild understatement. If you want to see some, well, frankly, dancing in the end zone, go ahead and check him out on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. I will have more on this. I actually have some Apple World developers scheduled in the coming months. This is kind of what you want. You give the freedom here. You know, if you are a one-man band, to just use the in-app purchase system, which probably makes a ton of sense. I imagine there are going to be plenty of users who prefer it. But if you are an Epic Games or, you know, you're selling some sort of professional tool that either is an app or has an app extension, and you don't want to, you know, give up 30% when you already have the infrastructure built to take payments or subscriptions just because someone found you via iOS or happens to prefer, you know, doing whatever it is that your application does on their iPad. You don't have to give that up. I like it. I think there's a little bit of catharsis here, right? Of, you know, Apple's arguments and kind of their implementation of the original ruling was, as one of my old college professors would say, too clever by half, right? You're just too cute, too much, you know, my kid will do it like, well, Dad, you said I couldn't have 5 cookies, but how about 6? That kind of thing, right? Like, it's like, yeah, you technically, like, you know, you lawyered your way to a plausible, we're not breaking the order, but you knew what the order meant. And I'm actually shocked at how just scathing Judge Yvonne's ruling on the civil contempt was, and that she is in fact referring it to a criminal contempt charge because one of the Apple VPs, in her opinion, lied under oath to her. Which, again, this is this too clever by half stuff where Apple, you know, there was Jeff Atwood, I believe, wrote a great post, you know, serving at the pleasure of the king. Apple had this kind of, you know, the Saint-Metois, right? Louis XIV, the Sun King, they're the great ones, where they get to tell developers who serve at their pleasure what they do. And that has now collided with, you know, the regular kind of antitrust justice system. If you think about it, the App Store economy is a really big economy. And it's also got some weird unintended side effects. For example, it's pretty, and this is again, the judge said this the original case. So it sounds like the gamers, right? Let's say you're, you know, people buying V-Bucks or Smurfberries or whatever the hell, ended up subsidizing folks like Chase Bank and Wells Fargo because, well, your bank doesn't have in-app purchases. So they don't pay 30%. So they're just kind of on the App Store for their $100 a month and whatever their dev cost is. And that's it. This is a big change. I think the implications are, this is where I kind of pop the balloon, less significant for your independent developer and small shop. I think there's going to be tons of reasons for those folks to keep, or at least consider keeping, the old in-app purchase model. But it is just totally correct and objectively a good thing that, you know, a little crack in the App Store wall, right? The walled garden, we can see the sunlight out again. I'd like to see Apple just take this next step and unleash the iPad. Stop making it pay your strategy tax. But, you know, if anyone listening for a long time has heard my little annual disappointment rant with how hobbled the iPad is by Apple's restrictive APIs, frankly, what I perceive as the fear of cannibalizing lower end Macs. And we're not there yet. And I don't think we're going to get there via court rulings. But this is a good start. I hope this does help some of you make your businesses healthier, where you work, financially better, if an app purchase was a big cut into you. And yeah, we'll see. The proof is going to be in the pudding of the eating, which is an expression my CTO uses that I find odd, but he says it all the time, so it's stuck in my head. Of, does Apple try to pull some Dennis the Menace level, cutesy clever crap now? Or are they, as I suspect they are, going to just give up the ghost on this one and possibly try for some legal maneuvering that's going to take forever? They did try to have this ruling not go into effect immediately. The judge wasn't having that because, delay, right? Stalling is the game when you're a big company and you can just go forever. Tim Sweeney is saying Fortnite might be back in the US App Store. Maybe. I mean, I thought Apple's stated reason for throwing them out was that they broke the contract, the developer agreement, by doing that, frankly, hilarious advertising campaign to introduce their lawsuit, the one that mimicked the 1984 Big Brother commercial. But maybe they have some way to do it. Maybe they're just blustering their way through, because Tim Sweeney did announce this on Twitter and hoping that Apple might feel chastened and just let them back in. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But, going to keep an eye on it. Going to talk to some developers who are more actively in that market. And other than that little side note, let's talk to Sean. Enjoy. Hello. All right. So I am here with Sean McBride. He is a West Point grad and, much to the chagrin of the crab people, a very experienced C++ developer. That's right. Rust hasn't completely taken over. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's funny you mentioned that. So we chatted before on the Mike Dominic show about 5 years ago. And actually at the time we were discussing Rust, and you were calling me a Rust evangelist. And one of the topics was basically about how, as excited as people are about Rust, the jobs really aren't available. So at the time I was talking about how I was expecting I'd probably have to stay in kind of the C and C++ side. So I mean, Rust is okay, but yeah, I'm happy to go where people pay, basically.
Makes sense, yeah. And you've done lots of large scale C++ projects. Are you, just out of curiosity, are you focused on Windows or a certain type of development or industry?
Yeah, so I mostly have been kind of on the low level side of things. So driver development, kernel development, embedded systems, which, sometimes in those environments, you have to turn off exceptions. You can't use the STL. So, is that really C++? Some people differ, I guess. So, it is what it is. I mostly am interested in kind of the low level kind of systems empathy sort of stuff.
So that's interesting, though. You say turning off exceptions and, the STL, some of that stuff. Some people would consider it not true C++. Can you expand on that a little? Why would that be the dividing line?
Yeah. So, C++ came out basically around when I was born. So I'm 39, turning 40 later this year.
Congratulations.
And so C++ is about the same age, right? So getting up there. And exceptions came into the language a good chunk in after people had been coding with C++ for something like 10 years or so. So you can kind of think of it at the time, C++ was sort of like TypeScript, right? Where you do source-to-source translation, use it to C, essentially. And then essentially it got more complicated and forked off and stuff. But yeah, so because of that, there are all these different code bases that are different, have different ages. People have different opinions about were exceptions good or bad for performance reasons. And kind of the interesting fault line around this right now is arguments around the term C/C++. So some people will group the two languages together. And there was Computing magazine that was very popular, published by the folks that made Dr. Dobbs Journal, and it was called the C/C++ Journal. So it was that was kind of a thing. But now Bjarne Strassrup basically says that people that use the term C/C++ are probably like bad developers because they're using pointers instead of references or smart pointers. They're not properly using the STL. Like there's kind of like a lot of interesting culture war stuff going on, like even to the point of some of the C++ thought leaders say that software engineers should not use any raw loops like a for loop. And you should just totally have like declarative algorithms.
Which is like chapter 2 of every programming book ever written.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny you say the C/C++ thing. They used to, well, there's two funny things actually. One, Linus Torvalds would absolutely blow his top if somebody put that on the Linux mailing list. I mean, there's no way he'd get away with that one. Secondly, Objective-C used to be called in Apple's documentation Objective-C/C++.
Yeah, well, and that actually came up recently in kind of the C++ world. So in the upcoming version, there is a bunch of new syntax coming out, and one of the possible syntax styles turned out to have conflict with Objective-C++. So I mean, it sounds like in Apple, like they have basically kind of a mishmash of Objective-C and C++, which, that's a lot to keep in your head.
Yeah, well, now they have Swift, right? But if you look at a lot of their internal stuff, especially the Mac stuff, a lot of it's actually like straight C++ still, not even Objective-C. Some of the Carbon stuff that is still underneath the hood, no matter what they say, is just C. So it's interesting that these new languages come along. I understand that a Swift Rust comparison doesn't make a ton of sense, but in terms of them both being new, and well, even Go could be in this camp, right? Designed, at least in theory, to be successors to C++, or I guess in Apple's case, Objective-C.
Yeah, well, so Swift actually is like in a discussion around successor languages to C++. Swift is often in there, and they've actually been adding some very aggressive C++ interop. So I have not really played with it myself because I'm not super familiar with Swift and don't really run on Mac hardware. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like the interop is pretty fantastic. So like I know the Ladybird browser, that's kind of one of these open source projects trying to build a new browser from scratch. They were very much C++, and they had a vote and decided to transition over to Swift. So they're very aggressively using all that Swift interop type of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the interop because I was actually, it must have been Tuesday, I was helping out at a game project, and it's a C++ game, right? Written, and I always say it wrong. I think it's SDL. D is in Delta, I think. Or is it SDL?
That sounds right.
I think that's right. It's the graphics library. Someone will correct me on the Discord or in the comments. It's fine. And they needed to, basically, it's a demo they're doing, right? They're trying to get interest in investors, and they needed to wrap it for iOS. And, they went through all these, do we have to go through an engine? I'm like, no, we'll do a Swift UI wrapper. Here's your metal view, right? And we found this BFGX. I'm winging this. That's right, library. That's exactly what it does. It works with the Swift interop, and it translates your, in this case, OpenGL calls to metal as well as it could, right? I'm not sure that I would trust this for production for these guys, but to show an investor, because they're trying to raise capital to port to iOS, it makes a ton of sense. I was shocked at how even after, I would say, just like 4 years of having not looked at the C++ operability with Swift, it's really good now. And the tooling in Xcode, it kind of just figures it out and suggests, you need to add this annotation, because it's all annotations, right? You need to add this annotation to the Swift side of it. Add this, whatever, the bridging header and all that good stuff. So not dead and surprisingly well supported. So was your project considering Swift as the primary language? The one you were referring to?
Oh, no. So I was talking about Ladybird browser. I haven't personally really messed around with Swift. I've maintained some Objective-C++ bindings, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not really an iOS or Mac guy, so. But I think that the interop thing is kind of a big critical piece. So I know in previous episodes you've talked about kind of the blow up about Rust in the Linux kernel, and Rust just has a lot of opinions about things, and it just makes it very challenging to integrate to existing software code bases. So, things like Swift that are able to bring in kind of the 85% safety story with a clean interop that kind of slots in nicely. I think that's got a lot of potential.
Awesome. But that's not really what we're here to talk about today, right? So I took you down a Swift interop side tangent. You wrote what I think is one of the most, frankly, correct posts I've seen in a long time regarding, and I want to make sure I get your title right here, ending the software development priesthood.
Yeah. Oh, close. So
Close,
you got to get the clickbaity title for these sorts of things.
Clickbait me. Go for it.
The title is "It's Time to End the Programming Priesthood."
The programming priesthood. So I have to tell you, I don't know how deep you are into sci-fi. I immediately saw the techno mages, right? The bald guy, the guy that played Mr. Freeze in Babylon 5. They're basically tech wizards. And I'm like,
yep,
you got a good point. And so kind of walk us through a Cliff Notes version. What constitutes this holy order of probably more celibate than they'd like to be men?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back. So one of my favorite books about computing history, which is kind of like, it's a geek classic, is Stephen Levy's Hackers.
Amazing. Yep.
Yeah. So, that plus like Soul of a New Machine, like everyone's got to read those kind of books. So Stephen Levy Hackers is kind of where this language comes from. So basically we're kind of talking about early computing, 1960s era. And what was happening at that time is that we had these kind of geeky model railroad club computer programmer types at like MIT. And, they are really interested in computing and programming. But the way things worked at the time is that computer was a big mainframe thing, right? Many, many millions of dollars. So it's closer to like a quantum computer or a particle accelerator or something like that today. And so if you wanted to program one of these things, what you would have to do is you get out your piece of paper and you basically write out your assembly language instructions or Fortran code on a piece of paper. And you read it, you check it in your head. And then when you're like comfortable with it, you go to essentially a specialized typewriter. You type in character after character. And as you're typing, it's punching cards into an IBM punch card. And then at the end of that, you get basically a big stack of punch cards. You wrap a rubber band around that and you walk up to a window, sort of like the DMV. And behind the window is a computer operator. And so that's who was considered the priesthood in Stephen Levy's Hackers. So to be able to run your program, you basically had to have a human being behind the window working as a computer operator that is willing to run your code. And they've got all sorts of processes and things around this. And so you pass the code and it's like, all right, come back, next Tuesday and you go to like a cubby hole and you get a printout of the run of your program, right? So if you got a syntax error, you got anything like that, you might be looking at like another week round trip to be able to iterate on your code.
Gotta watch those semicolons if you're waiting a week, right?
Right, exactly. And kind of one of the interesting things is like my grandfather was actually one of these computer operators. And so basically when he got out of the Air Force after the Korean War, he was able to go to kind of the equivalent of like a coding boot camp at the time and learn how to basically operate an IBM 1401 mainframe. And so, he was one of these guys that basically could ruin a programmer's day.
So in what way could he ruin the day?
So he could basically ruin the day basically by choosing to, run your stack of punch cards later or like reorder. So, you buy someone like beer or whiskey or something, and then, maybe they swap around the jobs that are run and stuff. So, yeah. So then that's kind of where this priesthood idea comes from. And I'll just read a brief clause here.
Sure.
All right. So the model railroad hackers were devising ways to get into closer contact with the IBM 704. by hanging out at the computation center in the wee hours of the morning, and by getting to know the priesthood, and by bowing and scraping the requisite number of times, people like Kotak were eventually able to push a few buttons on the machine and watch the lights as it worked. Right. So it's kind of like you get in good graces with the priesthood. Maybe they let you actually like see the machine or touch it even. Yeah. So because of kind of the frictions around all this, this led to what was called the personal computer revolution, and kind of the earlier version of this, the time sharing revolution. And there were a bunch of people like JCR Licklider that were kind of like, they're like humanities people, but they are technologists and really interested in kind of the future of how computing is going to evolve. And so they were talking about things like human computing symbiosis in the 1960s. And one of the visions for that was, instead of typing into the key punch, that's a specialized typewriter that generates the punch cards. What if you're like you've got a live screen and a keyboard connected to the computer, and you're directly interacting with the software as you write it?
Yeah, so that's a big step. Now that gets rid of the actual computer operators.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that ended up winning, right? And so,
right, of course, that's what we're all on now. Basically.
That's what we're all on now, and that was basically written down as kind of computing lore and history, and like Stephen Levy's Hackers. And what ended up happening to a lot of the computer operators is that their jobs ended up being automated away, right? So in the case of my grandfather, he ended up leaving the technology profession entirely and became a federal government worker, for example. And so, a lot of people decided to go different ways. Some people ended up going more on the programming side. So they ended up going on the other side of the window, and they became, the sorts of people that wrote the automation that replaced the tasks they did manually previously. Other people decided to leave the field, and there was like a lot of kind of economic turmoil around that time.
Oh, it's a transition period, right? So it's going to be rough. Now, it's interesting how that relates to today, right? With tools like, I guess we can plug Copilot and ChatGPT and Claude and what is it, Cursor? Cursor's the browser with Claude built in, right?
Yeah, we got new ones every week. We got.
I know there's so many. My inbox
Claude
is
3.7. Yeah, so it's a whole nother thing we got to kind of keep track of. Yeah, and so here's kind of the interesting comparison. So this first occurred to me when I was just taking a walk outside. I listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to Coda Radio for a long time. One of the other podcasts I like to listen to on very long walks is the Lex Friedman podcast, right? Because they're like 4 or 5 hours long sometimes.
Those walks are more like, that's more of a hike in my book, but sure.
A hike, exactly. And they had Stephen Wolfram on, who is mathematician, created Wolfram Alpha, and just absolute genius guy. And he's been, he's kind of like an honorary computer scientist, I would say. And he's been very active in the field for a long time. And he had, he talked about a lot of stuff. He had a new book coming out, like How ChatGPT Works, which he was plugging, of course. And so there was expansive discussions about the future of programming, software development, things like that. And one of the really interesting things is he was describing what it was like being a mathematician and having, a problem that you need to be able to solve using computation. And it kind of connected with this programming priesthood kind of idea. So he was talking about, before Mathematica, if you're like a physicist or a mathematician and you've got some problem you want to solve, you need to go find a programmer. You need to get in their good graces. You need to delegate the computation to that programmer in terms of like formulating requirements and things. And, then they go off and they do their thing. They come back in a quote unquote long multi-week loop, which was something that might or might not be useful. Right. And so it's kind of the same sort of dynamic where you got someone that has some problem. So they're providing kind of the intent of what we want the computation to do. It gets passed off to someone that is maybe in kind of in the middle here, which has to formulate the problem in terms of something the computer can access or process, generating results and then take it back. And Yeah. And so that's that, like, kind of thinking about, are programmers today like people outside the window? Are we inside the window? Are we a combination of that? And what does that kind of mean about the transition going on with large language models?
So I'll let you go for. Well, you know what? I have a theory about this, which you've probably heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
About this concept that I'm calling the 10x executive, right? 10x exec, right? Because I see these guys. I've actually seen this happening for a while, but it seems to have gotten supercharged by. I mean, it's mostly ChatGPT, but LLMs in general, where these are. I'll give you an example. Actually, this example is my mom. Believe it or not,
Nice.
she is
Okay.
a typical business person, right? She's. I guess you would call her an accountant. She does accounting. I there's all how it's funny they think that we're all like IT nerds in the other industries. That's how
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel about all the other industries, right? I don't know. I know there's differences between different types of accountants, but she's some sort of accountant. But she's also what I would consider to be a dark lord of Excel, or I guess dark
Hmm.
lady of Excel in this case. And even before LLMs, and she's not using LLMs yet, but I'm trying to convince her. She was automating Excel by what I would call coding, right? I would call this like light C# scripting in that weird domain language that Excel used to have, which incidentally now you can just use Python or straight C# if you want. And with things like ChatGPT or Power BI, just processing massive amounts of data very quickly out of these large spreadsheets. I have another guy over at West who is just going in with Power BI. And instead of, we're his development vendor, instead of calling us, which is fine for like a little dashboard screen, he just does it himself, right?
Hmm.
So in a way, he's both in your in the window metaphor, he's both in and out of the window. Now
Hmm.
he can't do everything, right? He can't build his own application. It's like my mom can't like build, her own, I don't know, QuickBooks. My Sean, accounting is not my best suit. it's it's an area where the Internal Revenue Service has mentioned to me that I'm bad at, surprisingly often in their favor,
Okay.
which
Okay.
they're interestingly less
Well,
eager
they
to
they probably
share.
like that. They like that.
Well, they like it until they're like, "Ha, we're gonna look at your stuff and be like, oh, you did screw up, but shit, we owe you money. That's bad. Why did we ought no?" It's just incredible. These folks who've been able to basically empower themselves. Now, this is where I take the leap that I think I'm getting some pushback on, but
Hmm.
not as much as I thought. I don't think that these LLMs are going to be the end of, us, right?
Hmm.
I do think that what they're going to do is empower these business types or, operational types to go ahead and need less handholding for small tasks. Like, my dashboard page example, right? Give me all the sales for the last, I don't know, 50 weeks or whatever they want. The only I guess I don't see it as a bad thing is what I'm trying to get at, right? I agree with you that this idea that writing a line of code is somehow a precious, like pretty princess thing that we have to keep, safe and protected from what I think is an inevitable and frankly rapidly increasing technological change that is going to empower our customers or stakeholders or users, right? I just don't think we should be afraid of that. I do worry about like junior developers because I
Yeah.
feel like the way they're used now, right, the way they're tasked, one, I don't think it was very effective to begin with. That's why, if you can go on Reddit or our Discord or wherever, and it's a mix of, people wanting to break in who are junior developers trying and, angry, grumpy graybeards. So
Yeah.
who are angry at them, but they don't teach them anything. And it's like, yeah, it is probably easier to get, Cursor to write your unit test on your, I don't know, Python, Flask app, right? It probably will do it just as fast or in some cases, maybe faster. but I almost feel like that's not the job. See, I'm trying to formulate this as we go,
Mm-hmm.
and that I don't think sitting there and actually like processing the code, right, writing the code is the real job of a software developer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good point. So I think I'm probably similar to you. Like maybe I'm a little bit more on the what is it, accelerationist side a little bit, but I I think like we're looking at a transition that's going to play out over kind of like a generation of programmers here.
Yeah.
So, the next 10, 20 years, we're going to see this stuff pick up more. So, like kind of the example with your mom, there are all these people out there like web designers or like art directors at game studios, like these sorts of folks that have like, intent about how the computation should work and what the results should look like. And they don't necessarily have all the computer science, software engineering knowledge. And they're going out and essentially using the methodology with two very overused kind of terms. One is CHOP, chat oriented programming, and the other is vibes based coding.
Oh, I have a whole show on that's coming out, who knows when it's coming out? But yeah. Oh
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, and so those folks are doing that, and there's no stopping them, right? They're going to keep interacting directly with the machine and kind of push this forward. And I suspect what's going to happen as these tools improve is using those kind of rough techniques. It's going to solve the business problem and get things done. Maybe the code looks a little bit messy under the hood, but to be honest, like if I write C++, sometimes the assembly language looks a little messy under the hood, but I don't look at that all the time.
You don't, yeah.
So, yeah, so I think like over the next 10 years, 20 years, we're going to have kind of a transition. And I think like sometime in that long,
I think it's like 5 to 10. I don't think it's 10 to.
Yeah. Well, this kind of comes down to like exactly what's going to happen with the scaling of these big clusters and things.
True.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm not necessarily enough of a computer architect, computer engineer to really guess. The last 2 years, the progress has been like incredibly fast. I remember like when Copilot first came out, and it's kind of a glorified autocomplete. You type in like your comments and you see like that gray ghost looking text of kind of like a crappy function. and it basically looks like a lot of, like what a CS100 student would kind of write, something random.
I call it drunk college kid coding. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're pair programming with a drunk college kid. Exactly. And so that was like, I saw that. I'm like, ha ha ha, this is a dead end. This is going to go anywhere. But, now like when I specify a problem out and use kind of the chat interface rather than that kind of like tab autocomplete stuff, the output is very impressive. And I've got a couple of YouTubers that I am very interested in. Yeah. So my go-to YouTuber for kind of the optimistic take is Wes Roth. And he does a lot of experiments with the different models and does things like uses like chat oriented programming to be able to do something like a game jam. And so he's got a video where he says, I want to create something like Grand Theft Auto for the PlayStation, where he's only using kind of the chat interface, and he's able to generate a overhead view of a cityscape with a character running around able to steal cars and shoot pedestrians and stuff like that without touching any code whatsoever. So like, I think that game jam kind of stuff in particular, which is getting a little bit more viral on social media, really points to that. Like there's a lot of potential for this sort of thing. My go-to YouTuber for a contrarian take is the Internet of Bugs. And I think he's a little bit more on the curmudgeon-y graybeard side, which is a valuable opinion to hear. And he is very concerned about how, vibes-based coding is basically going to increase the number of security vulnerabilities and all sorts of things like that, which probably is true to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, but is it any worse than copy pasta from Stack Overflow?
Well, yeah, right. Yeah. So with like kind of these
Which, by the way, Stack
LLMs.
Overflow is, I mean, goddamn, what a, oof.
Oh yeah, don't want to be an investor with them.
No, don't want to be. That's rough. I've been, and it was overnight basically. I haven't seen a beating like that. Jesus.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of the scary part of all this is like we've got this transition going on. Maybe it's 1020, maybe it's 510, but it's like we also don't really know, is this going to be like a linear thing or there going to be kind of some drops here? And I guess one of my more doomer takes is kind of thinking about how does automation through LLMs interplay with kind of like offshoring? Because a lot of like in kind of the higher paid nations like the United States, like a lot of your value is kind of being outside the window, right? Being able to interact and draw out business requirements, interact with stakeholders, things like that. So like all the kind of stuff you do basically as an indie, like that's the most valuable stuff. The stuff behind the window, like that's the stuff that's potentially going to be more automated. So like in WordPress, they have different roles, right? So you could have like a multi-author blog and you delegate like an author role to someone and they've got like a separate editor role and like an approval process around that. I kind of wonder, like, is GitHub going to have something like that in the future where, you've got your vibes-based coder stakeholder person. And if they hit some sort of, issue where the generated code goes off the rails or something doesn't quite work, they're able to get like kind of a remote person in to provide support, remote editor, something like that.
So what, GitHub would become a dev shop?
I'm not sure that they're going to do this. Maybe this is a freebie idea for you. You could build up the front portal, and
it's not a bad idea.
And your shop could basically do kind of the editorial oversight for people doing kind of the chop or five space coding.
It's not too bad, Sean. This will come out in 6 months when I'm ready to launch. It'll be Jar Jar LLC. It'll be great.
Nice.
You said not know what you're doing. Misa, help.
Yeah.
It is going to be a transition. I think it's, I have a hard time with the kind of resistance is futile, even though I believe that on some level. I just think people are going to need software, and they're going to need more software as time goes on. Right? We're not there yet. I mean, especially if you work with like, regulated or government systems, things are living way in the past in some cases, sure. In a lot of cases, right? I just think there's a big delta. I don't know. Maybe, so now I'm talking myself into your timeline, like 10 to 20, because no one's going to trust their airplane software unless they're Boeing and trying to save money to an LLM, and that's maybe a good thing, right? I guess I feel like it's the robot and the person, not just the robot. Now there will be I think your offshoring example is good. There will be, I believe, unscrupulous. I mean, we all know these guys, right? They're like middle-aged. They used to work at some, semi-prestigious consultancy or, and when I say consultancy, I'm thinking like, what's the evil one? McKinsey.
Mm-hmm.
What they do now, because I often compete with these guys and I found fun and exciting ways to beat them at their own game, is they pretend to be like a dev shop, like my shop, right? And what they really are is a guy who, has the connections, knows how to talk, whatever, and just offshores everything.
Yeah.
My fear is what they're going to become is a guy who hires like, some very, very junior person, whether they be offshore or not, to pilot, I don't know, let's say ChatGPT, right? Some LLM. And they try to ship that. That seems bad for everybody. Seems bad for the offshore developers. Seems certainly bad for the end client. And, bad for dev shops. Though I think we saw like those guys tend to get hammered in the end, right? They might snake you out of a deal here and there, but they're not, because they can't produce in most cases.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to kind of think about how LLMs might change that. I can't remember where I saw this take before, but someone was describing kind of like LLMs as makeup for the mind, right? to
Oh,
kind
good.
of just augment your intelligence and look a little bit smarter than you innately are. And it's I don't know. Yeah, it's that kind of offshoring plus LLMs piece is a little bit troubling to me because I think if people are predominantly interacting with a chat-based interface, there could be kind of a mechanical Turk person behind the scenes there, right?
Sure.
So that like when Amazon was running their self-checkout stores and it turned out that there was basically like an Indian call center that was
Oh, that's
tagging
right.
people. Like I could imagine something like that happening with software. But yeah, I think that still focusing on the skills that are like in front of the window, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the best long-term solution for us. So I think specifically for someone like you, right? You've basically been in kind of like a little bit of a post-apocalyptic wasteland for a while as indie dev shop, right? And so I think like you've got the evolutionary genes that now the W2 people are going to basically need.
Well, get used to Soylent Green. There's a little thing you can buy that you can drink contaminated water. I forgot the name, but it basically looks like honestly, it kind of looks like a thick straw. Yeah, it is true though. I mean, you raise a good point. So just down here in the Tampa St. Pete area, I used to have like 6 competitors that were very similar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the little guys do tend to get wiped out first. But I think once you get used to post-apocalyptic is so harsh though. We're going to discourage.
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe we should dial it back and go to the Star Trek a little bit.
Well, it is true though that right like why is the front page of Ars Technica the day we're recording this is all about the vibe coders? Well, I'll tell you why. The VCs and frankly the money men who run things, developers are really expensive, right? Dev shops are expensive. They just are. If you can get away with offloading a bunch to an LLM, they're going to want to do that. Just like, this is very specific to me and to people who did early iOS development. But I can't tell you how eager people were to go to hybrid solutions for mobile simply based on cost, which is a totally rational thing, right? I'm not, as the kids would say, throwing shade at these people. I'm just saying there is an entire structure of people. We call them biz guys, idea guys, accountants, whatever name you want to give them, that their job is to minimize costs. And you're hearing about code generation on CNBC right now.
Yeah.
That's the reason, right? All the layoffs, that's the reason they think they're going to lower cost. It's fine if they can. The big question is, are we going to be living in a bug-ridden wasteland of broken stuff? I don't know. Right? We're going to find out. I certainly think it's a little crazy, but...
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, thinking about my grandfather, right? I think, like, being kind of the specialist with kind of the esoteric knowledge that might potentially get automated. Like, it's going to be, I think, painful for us as kind of like a class.
Yeah.
And we got to adapt. But like, I think kind of zooming out to the bigger picture, I know you're a Star Trek fan. Like, I really do kind of think we're moving towards a Star Trek computer, tea Earl Grey hot. And I think that just for humanity, at all of humanity, being able to basically give people the same sort of powers that programmers have, it's going to unlock a lot of creativity. Every little Reddit fandom is going to have, really amazing, Babylon 5 fan fiction, and fan fiction will turn into, new episodes that are generated by LLMs, maybe new games and things like that. So, I mean, I'm here for it. I'm excited. I've got some trepidation about, how am I going to pay the bills and all that sort of stuff, like a lot of people. But I think there's a lot that's going to be very exciting, and I'm glad to be living when I'm living.
I totally agree. I think that's actually a great place to wrap up. So don't be pessimistic, folks. You go through enough of these transitions, it gets kind of old hat. But Sean, the question I always end on: what is one tool? Can be anything, right? Your coffee machine, your IDE, I don't know why it would be an Allen wrench, but your Allen wrench, if that, although really, who could live without an Allen wrench? Anyway,
Right.
one tool you can't live without.
I mean, I think there's been a lot of churn with this lately. So I have really been enjoying ChatGPT advanced voice mode.
Okay.
So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of the things that I've been finding is, for some of these longer hikes, like we were talking, where I might listen to Lex Friedman. Now, sometimes I'm doing, open AI advanced voice mode to kind of talk through a topic or something like that. And it's amazing what it's able to do. So, for example, like I learned German in high school and took some college classes, but it's gotten pretty rusty, right? Like I did a semester abroad like 20 years ago, but don't really encounter a lot of German speakers in the States. But I can, have a chat about current events in German with open AI and ask it to, correct all my grammatical mistakes and things like that. So, with like a lot of these new LLM based tools, like there's a lot of capability and we don't really even know what all they're able to do. But yeah, that's, I would say, advanced voice mode.
All right, that's a great choice. I actually haven't tried it out. I tried the voice thing in whatever it is, Grok, and I just had it tell me off, which was interesting. Very
Yeah, right. Well, that's got the not safe for work stuff, like
hater mode.
Hater mode, and it's got, I think, something like a sex line also, which is,
of course, I did not know that. Well, so it's basically my Twitter DMs now. I don't understand. That's a whole another conversation we're not going to go into. But
yeah.
All right. Well, Sean, where could the folks find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, on Weapon X, and on Weapon X, and then on our Coda Radio Discord, which I just joined a couple of days ago. So happy to continue the discussion with listeners. That definitely seems like the most poppin' place for this podcast.
It is. I'm actually going to stop promoting the Reddit because everybody's in Discord. It's grown. I don't even know how many people are in there to date, but it's always active, and we have folks from Europe too, so they're in there at night.
Awesome.
I think we even have folks from the former Soviet Union. The big part.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they're hanging. Mother Russia's here. We have the States. We have Germany. It's really a party. It's like the UN. If only the world leaders could get along like we do. Post some memes.
Yeah.
Try to understand why your strange Linux home servers aren't working. That seems to be a big topic for these guys. Yeah, good stuff. So, all right, Sean. Well, it was great having you on, and next time we'll have to dig a little deeper into why C++ is clearly superior to Rust.
Yeah, I'd love to. All right. Have a great day, Mike.
Talk to you later. Bye.